Hello, everybody, and welcome in for episode 5 of season 3 of the Lions Grid. I am your host, Kevin Marheine, joined today by my co-host, Joe Wilmot. How you doing today, Joe?
Doing great. Another day closer to the Lions' first preseason game.
It's getting very close here, and we've been doing an episode a day here to celebrate the return of Lions football. And so today's episode will be focused on taking a look at that 2019 Detroit Lions schedule, taking a look at who all is going to be involved in those games. I think obviously the preseason games are, as you mentioned, starting Thursday, so kicking off against the Patriots. But who else are we playing? And also taking a look at the strength of schedule statistic as well, just to see where we're at. So why don't we start there, and I'll toss it up here on the screen. All right. Detroit Lions finished the 2018 season at the 6-10 mark. Their opponents, their strength of schedule, which is based off of their opponent's win percentage last season, which you can see there at .496. That is tied for the 19th toughest schedule. So they're definitely middle of the pack. They're not playing a super tough schedule compared to some other people. And you can see there that 125, 127, and 4. That is the combined record for their opponents. So, there were a lot of ties last season, and by a lot, I mean there were multiple, which is weird. Usually, in a season, you don't see multiple ties, but 125, 127, and 4. So a losing record for the Lions' opponents. Like I said, they are tied for the 19th most difficult schedule. And just so that we can sort of compare that and give you some numbers to sort of see where that puts them, if we just look at the NFC North, you can see the Bears have the toughest schedule based off of what their opponents did the previous year. You can see them there with a .52 win percentage. The Vikings in second place there with a .512, and then the Packers at .504. So the Lions, the only team in the NFC North whose opponents did not manage to put together a winning record when you combine it all together. So, taking a look at that, definitely reason for optimism for the Lions fans, I think, Joe. Your opponents and, the guys that you're going to be competing for that NFC North title, in theory, they have harder schedules. So I know, as you sort of talked about, one of the keys is going to be getting off to a good start. Having a less difficult schedule as compared to your opponents, that in theory should help as well. What are your thoughts just looking at the strength of schedule? Do you think the Lions should have an easier road to an NFC North title than the other teams there, based off of what we're looking at from strength of schedule?
Yeah, based on strength of schedule, I think the Lions have exactly what they want. They have opponents that are going to play quality football, but not the best football. That's why I said in the beginning of the season is when they've versed the majority of their winning teams that won last year. And then as the season goes on, they verse, teams like the Raiders or like the Buccaneers, and the record goes down as far as, those teams' records that they had last year for the win percentage. So I think it's definitely in the favor. So in the earlier episode, I was talking about starting off the season at 3-3 or, at least 500 or 4-2 or, maybe even 2-4, and then having a run to go 10-6, mm-hmm. because the first 6 games is where the majority of those wins come from. They got teams like Kansas City, the Eagles, the Chargers. So it's definitely a front end heavy schedule for the Lions to start up the season and say, okay, we're playing these teams, but that might also be the best time to strike, because some of these teams that are coming off winning seasons, they might take a little while to get back in the flow of things, and they've had a whole off season. The success is not the same as last year. They have to rebuild a whole new season. So those winning teams of last year, they have to become winning teams again this year, and that's difficult to do in this day and age in the NFL. And so as far as a losing team from last year, still it's harder to be a losing team to become a winning team than a winning team to continue being a winning team. But I think if we have any optimistic about the first 6 games or 5 games, it's that we might be able to catch a couple of these good teams early on and take them by surprise.
Yeah, certainly. I think, especially depending on what sort of preseason each team has. Obviously, teams could be pretty vulnerable at the start of the season unless they're looking really dialed in during preseason. And speaking of preseason, let's go ahead and take a look at the first 4 games of the season, the preseason as they are. Taking a look at the first game, obviously this will be the first time we're seeing the Lions in action in 2019. You have the August 8th matchup at home against the New England Patriots. Then you take a look at the Week 2 preseason game, and that will be away. They'll be visiting the Houston Texans. Then the what has typically been the dress rehearsal game, that Week 3 game, will be hosting the Buffalo Bills. And then the final week of preseason, we taking on the Cleveland Browns. So, Joe, like I said, third game of the preseason is usually your dress rehearsal. I think it would be more exciting if we had been playing either the Texans or the Browns in Week 3. The Bills aren't super bad. They showed a little bit of life last season, but they're also, I would say, they are the worst of those 4 teams we're playing. So I would have liked to see either the Browns or the Texans, just because they're sort of 2 teams that I think are going to be on the rise. They're exciting to see. They have lots of talent, and it would have been nice to see how we stack up against a team like that. I think the Bills are a team that we should win, so I don't know if we're going to learn as much about the team playing against a team that isn't as talented as some of our other preseason opponents. But what do you think about those preseason matchups? Is there anything, what are you looking forward to as we have those 4 games to see where the team's at this year?
Well, they're all AFC opponents. You got the Patriots, you got the Texans, you got the Browns, and you got the Bills, but the Bills is the third one. I think that I like the fact that the Browns are the last game, because that's usually when you're getting guys on the edge of a roster position and you see a lot of hard play from who's going to make the team, who's not going to make the team in the final effort to make the team. So granted, it's not the starters, but everybody in that game is going to compete more so. And, what we should see in Week 1 of the preseason against the Patriots is the depth that Patricia has come up with in this offseason to see, try out some guys, see who's working, what's not working. We're not going to get a good look at New England. It's only going to be preseason, but, Brady's not going to play. That type of stuff's not going to fly. But typically New England is as good as their starters. They don't have a lot of depth on their team. They have people who can fill in the role, but they don't have a lot of good backups. Everybody on their team is generally a good fit position starter, but when you come to backups and depth, I think it's a good chance for the Lions to prove that they have more depth in Week 1 against the Patriots. And Week 2 against the Texans, I really have no idea how that game is going to go, because the Lions have very little experience in the last few years playing the Texans. So that game is it's a big question mark. You want to see players play well and maybe see some new plays that are going to be incorporated into the offensive scheme of things, and that's when we might get a look at a little bit more deeper of the play calling with our new offensive coordinator. So there's that. And then the dress rehearsal game against the Bills, I really think that's a game that we should win. And I think it's a game that Stafford needs to play well in. And I think it's a game that is important, even though it's still a preseason game, but it's a game that you want to see players play a good game for 2 or 3 quarters and come away from it with no injuries. The biggest key in preseason is no injuries. My biggest thing is waiting till after the preseason to draft my fantasy draft, because you never know who's going to get injured during training camp or the preseason. And in the Browns, I like to think of that game as a preseason bowl game, because it's like, you got the winners of the 50s. The Browns won championships in the 50s, the Lions won championships in the 50s. They don't hardly ever meet, and if they ever did meet in the regular season or the playoffs, it better be the Super Bowl, because that's history right there of the NFL. And in the NFL's 100th season, it'll be fun to see the Lions and Browns in preseason action playing for roster positions.
Yeah, certainly, and I think you touched on a good point there when talking about the Week 3 dress rehearsal game. Obviously, the big thing is to make it through. You got to find that right balance, right, of making sure that people are ready for the upcoming season, and you want to make sure that everyone's good to go. But you want to avoid injuries at all costs, because an injury in preseason, especially to one of your premier players, can have a big impact on the rest of the season. So what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and we'll hop into taking a look at the regular season games. We'll cover some of them and go kind of quick. Other ones we'll sort of stop and share a couple thoughts about them. But taking a look here at the Week 1 opponent, we'll be starting off the season away from Ford Field, taking on the Arizona Cardinals. And we'll spend just a brief moment talking about this game, just because it's the first game of the season. It'll be the first real game. This is where the games start to count, and obviously going up against the Arizona Cardinals, there is definitely a chance to start the season off 1-0. You look at the Cardinals themselves. You have the new head coach coming in there, Cliff Kingsbury. Can he adapt his college offense to the NFL? Obviously, you might have the first round pick, Kyle Miller. What's
Kyler Murray?
I got myself all, Kyler Murray. There you go. Thank you. I got myself all discombobulated. You got him potentially starting, so there's a lot of question marks on that Arizona Cardinals team. They did not have a good 2018, so certainly a chance for the Lions to start off there, and I think a game, you want to see them start off 1-0 because it's a game they should win. Hopping in here, you can see, as you mentioned, a tough opponent in Week 2. The good news is it will be home, taking on those Los Angeles Chargers. Should be a rather interesting one there. Again, the Chargers coming off a pretty good campaign and a very explosive defense.
Melvin Gordon may still be holding out at this time, so it could be a good game to have to just play Phillip Rivers for the pass and not have to game plan against Melvin Gordon. So be sure to watch and see if he gets a negotiation of a contract settled throughout the preseason. But if not, you have to game plan for the pass. I don't know who the backup is for running back at the Chargers position, but Phillip Rivers always has 4,500 pass yards. Last year he had one of his best seasons. He's one of the highest ranked quarterbacks in Madden. You gotta plan for the pass playing against Phillip Rivers. It is at home. And this is one of those games I was talking about that you can catch a team early. Chargers had a lot of success last year. They ended the season frustrated, angry that they lost. And it might take them a few games to get back on the winning tide of things. I'm sure they're looking at the Lions schedule or the Lions game on their schedule and saying, oh, that's an easy win. So it might be a game where we can sneak up on them and steal one from them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You got to watch out to see if Melvin Gordon will be a go, because at that point I think it could be a good game to hopefully showcase all that defensive line talent that we have. Bringing in Trey Flowers, Mike Daniels. It could be a game for them to sort of pin their ears back and go after Phillip Rivers if the Chargers star running back isn't going to be with them. And then also potentially a good game for Darius Slay in that secondary. If the pass rush can get after Phillip Rivers, it should hopefully lead to a good game for them. Taking a look at the
early on in the season to get a victory.
Yeah, it's definitely winnable, but will be a challenge against a quality opponent. Hopping in here to week 4. Speaking of quality opponents, you have a team that could very well win the AFC. The Kansas City Chiefs, at least we will be playing them at home. Obviously, they are a very talented team, but should be, this one, I think if you count it as a loss, you're not too, you're not being too hard on the Lions. I think it's obviously a very tough opponent in Kansas City.
Yeah, I agree. Kansas City is going to be a tough one. I've seen some people talk about this game and say, "Oh, we can get Kansas City. We can beat Kansas City," but it's like it's Kansas City and the Saints who might be in the Super Bowl this year. So it's going to be a tough game to win.
For sure. Taking a look here, week 5, we finally get to see one of our NFC North opponents. We'll be traveling to Lambeau to take on the Packers. We'll play them again in December, so I think, it's better to travel to Lambeau as soon as you can. So definitely not upset that the Lions will be there in October. You avoid that December matchup in the frozen tundra there. So obviously, division games, whether it's against the Packers, the Bears, or the Vikings, they're really important games because you're going to see them twice, and those are the teams you're directly competing against for, your divisional crown. So that's where the NFC North battle kicks off for the Lions this year, visiting Lambeau and taking on the Packers.
I don't want to correct you, but that's week 6. Week 5 is a bye week.
That very true. Very true. That's a good point. That is the 5th opponent, but it is in week 6. Yeah, and how do you feel about having, the bye week comes kind of early this year for the Lions? Typically, I think teams like to have them more so towards the midway point of the season, just because it gives you a chance to get people healthy and then continue on with the rest of the season. Having it early like this, could be something that is kind of a detriment to the Lions in the fact that they won't have it, hopefully you can avoid injuries early on in the season. But as the season drags on and, you're putting your guys through all the stress of the games, obviously injuries, I think the risk of them goes up each week. So having it kind of early lets you reset the clock early, but then you don't have that later on when you might need it.
Here's my position on this. I mean, it gives you a chance to go 2-2 out of the gate, out of the first 4 games of the season, and then gives you an extra week to prepare for Green Bay. We don't know if they're going to start off strong season or, average season or, have a tough time in the season, but winning at Green Bay is always difficult. I know we've won 4 straight, but still winning 5 straight is going to be even harder than winning 4 straight. So, but it's always good to have an extra week to prepare for Green Bay. If you can get out of there, be 3-2 after the first 6 weeks, it's a good start.
It's pretty good. And I know we've sort of talked about it, but of course I do have a soft spot in my heart for the Packers, even though I am wearing a Lions shirt. Lions right there. And yeah, I think we were talking about it the other day. The Lions have beaten the Packers every time they've played since I've been joining. Since you started the Lions Grid, and I've been doing this with you. The Lions just win. So hopefully, greedily for myself as someone that does like the Packers, I do hope they can finally get over the slump. For most of our lives, the Lions never won at Lambeau, but now they're doing it like it's nothing. So
hey, if we could get a Bears fan and a Vikings fan over here too and win 2 straight against those guys every year, we'll win the division for sure.
That's the secret. Just get fans from those groups onto the show, and then the Lions will take care of the rest. Very nice. So taking a look here, speaking of Vikings, the next game after that Packers showdown is another NFC North matchup. The Lions will be playing host to the Vikings there. So again, just like we talked about, an important game for them in order to be successful long term in winning the division. Skipping ahead to the next one, what should be a pretty easy game for the Lions to win the Giants. Obviously, this is the NFL. Nothing should be taken for granted, but the Giants are definitely a team that aren't projected to do much this season, so should be pretty safe to put that in the win column for the Lions, and hopefully they can win that game at home against a struggling Giants team. Then in November, starting off the month of November there, away against the Oakland Raiders. This will be, I believe, their last season in Oakland before they need to find their new home in Los Angeles. So obviously the Raiders coming off a disappointing first season for John Gruden. Didn't end up the way they wanted. But there's definitely some talent there. Obviously, they brought in former Chippewa himself, Mr. Antonio Brown there to help out with that receiving core. Lots of talent on the offensive side of things with Derek Carr. I think obviously when you give up a player of Khalil Mack's caliber, I think the question marks are definitely still there for the defensive side of the things. But again, I think this is another game where the Lions should be considered favorites against the Raiders. What are your thoughts there, Joe?
I think John Gruden's building a team the way he wants to. I'm not going to compare him to John Madden, but he signed for a long-term deal. I think it was like 6 years, if I'm not mistaken, that he's going to be in Oakland or Los Angeles, and he's building the team the way he wants the team. I don't see him being good this year, but I see him being better than last year. This is going to be a fun game to watch. I like the Raiders. I've always liked the Raiders. And the fact that the Raiders used to be a championship caliber football team under John Madden, who is, the owner of the football game that I like to play, it's kind of cool that we play the Raiders this year. So that'll be one of my favorite games to watch this season.
Yeah, it should certainly be a pretty good game. I think, like I said, I think it's safe to. We're clicking around there. I think it's safe to say that the Lions should win that game, but it'll definitely be interesting to see how things play out. Because, like you said, I think John Gruden is building that team with guys that he trusts. He's getting those Gruden grinders in there, and it'll be interesting to see how that team looks in year 2 underneath him.
I saw a little bit of Hard Knocks, and he was like talking about go out there and take somebody's dream away from them. Their dream is to play in the NFL. You need to take that dream away from them. So he's definitely giving them the Hard Knocks, right?
Yeah, he's. I like whenever he's mic'd up. There's been some good ones through the years of things he said. So he's definitely an entertaining coach. I'd like to see him be successful. So, but. I'd also like to see the Lions win this game. So it's a little while I'm hopeful for the Raiders long term. This game hopefully the Lions can go in there and secure a win. All right, there's the Raiders. So moving on again to another NFC North matchup, we have the first game against the Bears. This game will be played at Chicago, and we'll talk about their other game here in a moment because they play twice in the month of November, but. The Bears obviously, not only is it a divisional game, but the Bears looking pretty solid. Questions like we talked about at the quarterback, but that defense certainly frightening. Then November 17th, the Dallas Cowboys will be coming into Ford Field. Another, as we sort of mentioned with the Chargers, another potential star running back holdout situation there with Dallas with Ezekiel Elliott not reporting to camp and being in Cabo. So another storyline to keep in mind there.
Yeah, did you hear what Jerry Jones said? He's like, you don't need to have a running back to win a NFL championship. You don't need to have a running back. Teams have done it without running back. Number one priority is fitting them into the team, but making it so that you can have other guys that are able to stay within the cap range of the whole team. Number one guy you need to have on your team is the quarterback, and Jerry Jones was like kind of talking about that the other day.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a very difficult situation for the Cowboys to make it work because you have Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott, and Amari Cooper all coming up for contracts around the same time. It's a very good young nucleus to build an offense around, but the problem is all of those guys are pretty good, so they all deserve a good amount of money. So how do you find the money to pay them all? That's the challenge for Jerry Jones. I think, for myself, Zeke is kind of going about it the wrong way. I personally a big fan of Zeke. He's been on my fantasy football team the last couple of years, and he's been he's carried it. he does some questionable things off the field, and Jerry Jones has Jerry Jones and the Cowboys have stood by him through that. So for me, considering that they've stood by him during some questionable times, I would have preferred that they figured this out sort of behind closed doors and that he didn't, publicly say, I'm holding out and going to Cabo. I think, you got to sort of repay the loyalty there, and it's all right to want to hold out for a new contract and all that, but I think there was a better way to go about it, considering how how Jerry Jones and the Cowboys organization has sort of stood by him during some of these times of controversy. Taking a look here, sticking in November, after we take on the Cowboys, we'll be traveling to Washington to take on the Redskins there. Perhaps Dwayne Haskins will be getting the start. Be interesting to see how that develops throughout the season and who will be the signal caller there for Washington moving forward.
Can I say one quick thing real quick?
Of course.
I like the fact that we're playing both the Chiefs and the Redskins this year because as a Chippewa, I like Indians, and now we got Chiefs and we have Redskins. It's going to be fun. Some people talk about the name of the Washington Redskins being offensive or something. The way I see it is it's the name of a football franchise. Does it need to be changed? I mean, if it's traditional, keep it. If it's more of an offensive thing, if you think it's offensive, which this generation of people mostly think it's offensive, mostly traditional people want to keep it. But is Jay Gruden still the head coach there?
He is still there, and could be potentially his last season, depending on how they do.
Yeah, we got both the Grudens on the schedule this year, both the Indian squads on the schedule this year. It's going to be a good year.
Lots of things going on. So yeah, it should be interesting to see. Like I said, there'll be some interesting storylines with Washington, with who will be at QB. Obviously, as you mentioned, Jay Gruden, it's going to be an important year for him to prove to the organization that he can still lead that team. So, I think compared to some of the other games where the Lions should be favored, I think this is a game they should watch out for. I think the Lions should be favored, but you don't, this is a sneaky team, and I think you got to watch out for them because if you go in there and underestimate them, I could see Washington maybe surprising some people there, and I think it's a game we should win. So hopefully they'll be prepared for that.
Yeah, I agree.
This year, the Thanksgiving game will be played against the Chicago Bears. So not only is it obviously that Thanksgiving tradition with the Lions, but it'll be a particularly important Thanksgiving game as we'll be playing the rival Bears. As I mentioned, this is the second game we'll be playing against the Bears in November. Definitely a very crucial game, as we sort of have talked about. You play each of these teams twice. They're your direct competition. Got to get a win. You excited for this year's Thanksgiving matchup, Joe?
I am. I'm a personal fan of you know how you're an alternate, Packer fan?
Yep.
I'm an alternate Bears fan. My dog's name is Bear. My sister lives in Chicago. I have an affiliation to the Bears somewhat. So it'll be a fun game to watch. Might be a fun game to go to. I always used to like going to the Thanksgiving games as a kid. I remember one year we played the Eagles on Thanksgiving, and Calvin Johnson, it was one of his last years. We had season tickets. And we absolutely smoked the Eagles. Calvin Johnson had like 300 yards and 3 TDs or something. It was awesome. So last year we played the Bears and we lost, but I don't see the Bears being as good as a team as they were last year. This year, I think the real opponent and what we saw in the Madden ratings yesterday is going to be the Green Bay Packers and the Chicago Bears. Those are going to be the two contenders. I don't think Minnesota is really in contention. Yeah, they have a good defense, but I don't think their offense is going to get it done. I don't think Kirk Cousins is the guy. I think we're going to see him go more towards a downward projection this year. And, he's more on his way out of the NFL than on his way higher ranking in the NFL. So Minnesota might be a team to not really compete for the division, but it's going to be between Chicago and Green Bay. Mostly, I'm going to have to say watch out for Green Bay this year. But, if you can get a game against Chicago and a game against Green Bay and take both against the Vikings, then you set yourself up good for division contention.
Most certainly, yeah. If obviously if you can win the sort of war against the NFC North, it definitely puts you in a great position to take home the division, because you've won the head-to-head matchups, and that's a big part of it. So yeah, what I guess obviously with the Lions playing on Thanksgiving every year, how does the game affect you? Are you the type of person where if the Lions lose on Thanksgiving, it like ruins the whole day, or is the Thanksgiving game with the Lions, win or lose, is just like the cherry on the top of your Thanksgiving celebrations? Which sort of bucket there do you fall in?
Yeah, no matter what, Thanksgiving is always like my favorite football day, because not only do you get to spend it with a bunch of family, you get to watch football with a bunch of family. And, even if they do lose the game, you get everybody talking about the game, coming in, what's the score, and checking in on how the game is going. And then after that, you get to watch America's football team, the Dallas Cowboys, and whoever they're playing. Typically, they play the Washington Redskins because they're in the same division. So you got Cowboys and Indians on Thanksgiving. That's always good, too. So, it's always fun to see those two games. And just recently, over the last couple of years, they've added a Thursday night football game to Thanksgiving. So that one's always fun to watch. You got football all day on Thursday. Mm-hmm. Typically, you have to wait for the weekend to get football. But on Thanksgiving, it's kind of like a fall classic type of games.
A little extra treat there to help celebrate the holiday. And yeah, I'm in the same boat. I think obviously, my heart doesn't bleed when the Lions lose, so it's never hit me that hard. But it's one of the, I think ingrained in the Thanksgiving tradition with me and my family is the football game. Not only the Lions, but the other football that's on that day. It's definitely a big part of our celebrations too. So happy to see that there's going to be a pretty good matchup for the Lions on that day. I think it gives it just a little extra something going up against the Bears. There will be nice. So running through, we only have 4 games left in the season after getting through the Thanksgiving game. So we'll go ahead and run through these real quick and then maybe sort of talk about any interesting storylines with them. So running through them real quick, we have the last game against the Minnesota Vikings there. That game will be played at Minnesota on December 8th. You have us playing host to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on December 15th. You have an away game, and the time on that one, I found it interesting. It was the only game where the kickoff time is not set. It's set for to be determined, so keep an eye on this one. The away game against the Denver Broncos, and then finishing off the season at home at Ford Field against the Green Bay Packers. Could be a very important game for both teams. I think the last... how it's been several seasons we have finished off the year taking on Green Bay, and I think it sort of alternates too, back and forth between being at Lambeau, at Ford Field. This season will be here at Ford Field, so a chance for the Lions to sort of settle things on their home turf against arguably their biggest divisional rival. Should be, but those 4 games there, a pretty exciting stretch of games. I think obviously the one kind of snooze game in there is the Tampa Bay game, a game the Lions should win, and Tampa Bay isn't super exciting. Obviously they sort of became a bit of a hot mess there last season at the quarterback position. It'll be kind of interesting to see if Jameis Winston is the long-term solution there, or if they have to go elsewhere. But should be a good sort of quarter of games there to close out the season. Any thoughts there for you, Joe, about those last 4?
I think the last 4 games are all winnable. I think the toughest one is going to be the Green Bay game. And I think if you can win the game in Chicago, at Ford Field against Chicago, and go on a 5-game winning streak, start off the season, at 2-2 in the bye week, that gives you 7 wins automatically. And gives you 2 losses. All of a sudden, you're at 7-2. You pick up 2 more wins out of 7 games, Raiders in there, and say against the Vikings again, that's a 9-7 season. That's very doable for the Detroit Lions this year, and it's a very positive looking into the schedule for the Detroit Lions. Again, if they do go into that game 8-7 against Green Bay, and Green Bay's got the same record, you don't want another scenario where Green Bay's throwing a Hail Mary into the end zone, coming up with that at the end of the game, because we've seen the Lions lose, a few times to division rivals like that. One against Minnesota, one against Green Bay, and let's hope it's not Chicago this year. But I was at that game a couple of years ago at Ford Field when Aaron Rodgers threw that up in the end zone, and they're like, "Oh, we were playing for the lateral situation, not the Hail Mary." And they come up with that win, and everybody in the crowd was cheering because they thought the ball was dropped. No, he caught the ball. Why do you cheering for? So.
Yeah, it's always tough to drop a divisional game, especially against a hated rival. But to do it in such a fashion, it definitely adds a sting, and they don't even have to be a hated rival. I remember, it's been a while now, but if you remember back to when Central Michigan beat Michigan State on those back-to-back onside kicks that they recovered,
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Things like that, those sort of fluky, it's one thing that they were able to recover one onside kick, but the fact that they then came back and onside kicked it again and they still weren't able to get the ball, it's kind of like that with the Hail Mary situation. It's like their fluky plays coming out on the wrong side of those make a loss that much worse.
I can say in my college, time spent at Central Michigan, that they actually won a game against Michigan State. My senior year, or my fifth year senior year, they actually played State again and they got crushed. But I can say that while I was there my sophomore year, that it was like Dan Lefevre and Antonio Brown came back and won the game against Michigan State.
And it was heartbreaking. I was there in the stadium, front row of the student section, and my soul was crushed. Not just once, but twice they onside kicked it, and it was horrible. And I want to say that was the same season that Iowa did something similar with Ricky Stanzi at quarterback, or maybe that was the next year. I just remember the two situations caused flashbacks of each other, and those are probably, the two more painful moments, even though they're not our biggest rivals. Losing to those in this way.
You made up for it. You made up for it when you got that Michigan punt return for a touchdown at the end of the game. You guys made up for that.
Sometimes you just it's always good when the flukiness is on your side, when you get that lucky bounce, and then when it's going against you, it hurts. So I hopefully feel for the Lions fan base, and we can sort of avoid any of those situations this season, because it's especially to the rival teams. It's one thing if maybe it happened to Tampa Bay or something like that. You can sort of forgive it, but it sucks when it happens to the people you hate, because. But that is sort of the 2019 season in a nutshell. Sort of went over the games there each week. As Joe mentioned, there's definitely an opportunity for the Lions to be successful. And as we've sort of been preaching on this entire episode, the big thing is going to be those divisional games, because there's a good mix of the opponents that are outside of the division the Lions have. Obviously you have some teams, as we mentioned, like the Chiefs, the Eagles, some of these top tier teams that you're going to be playing, where a victory might be difficult to come by. But then you have plenty of teams like the Giants and the Buccaneers and the Cardinals, and I'd even throw Denver in there, because they have, obviously they brought in Joe Flacco this offseason, but before Joe Flacco left Baltimore, there was QB controversy, so who knows what type of season he's going to have. So there's definitely the out of division schedule. There's some favorable matchups. There are some tough ones there. Depending on what happens with Melvin Gordon and Ezekiel Elliott, the games against the Cowboys and the Chargers might be easier. But as we've talked about, the big thing is going to be handling business against the Vikings, Bears, and Packers. if they can come out with a winning record against those three teams, they're putting themselves in a really great position. It'll help for the wild card race, but it obviously, will be a big impact on the divisional race. So that is going to do it for episode 5 here. We will be coming back again tomorrow. And if you're a fan of fantasy football, it's not going to be a super long episode. I know this one kind of carried on just because there was lots of interesting stories to talk about and things like that relating to the schedule. But tomorrow's episode should be a little faster paced and just taking a look at, if there are which Lions you should consider to have on your fantasy football team. Spoiler alert, there are a couple good wide receivers that if you're looking to build out your team, I wouldn't necessarily they're the early round picks, but I think there'll be some guys that can get you some production there to help your team. And we'll talk about all the things related to fantasy football and the Lions during our episode tomorrow. But want to thank everybody. As we've sort of mentioned in the last couple of videos, a goal of ours is to reach 100 subscribers. In each episode, we want to thank everybody because we've seen some decent growth towards that goal. Obviously, there's still plenty of room to go to reach that 100 mark, but just want to thank everybody. And just remember, if you do like the show, please do help the channel grow. Go ahead and like the video, hit the subscribe button if you want to be kept up to date when we're going live with these live streams or when a new video is made available. Go ahead and ring the bell as well on YouTube, and it'll send you an alert when we're going live. But that will do it for today's episode. Joe, any parting thoughts you want to leave the people with?
And the NFL's 100th season coming at you in 2020. It'd be nice to see the Lions in the playoffs.
It has been a little bit of a scarcity, so it would be a welcome sight here in season 100 to see the Lions get back in there. Also, if dare to dream, if we're gonna say the playoffs, maybe a playoff victory, that could be something. But
heck, if we're getting a playoff victory, may as well call it the Roaring 20s and win the Super Bowl for a few years.
We'll have to see. Obviously, a lot of season ahead of us. The preseason getting kicked off this Thursday, but a lot of time, and it's up to the Lions to come out here and prove it. So on behalf of Joe, just want to thank you, and myself, just want to thank you again for tuning into the Lions Grid. We'll be back again for another episode tomorrow, but that'll do it for us today. Have a good night, everyone, and we'll talk to you later. Peace.